Joining me now is a former Israeli National Security Advisor, Eyal Hulata. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Good evening.
So first, your view of whether Iran is truly in a position to negotiate now. Do you believe, does Israel believe, that it's been so weakened that they feel, listen, they have to make concessions in order to survive?
Well, for Iran, the term have to make concessions has proven to be false throughout the time. I mean, Iran very rarely willing to make concessions. They do this only when they have to, what they call drinking from the chalice of poison. And I'm not sure that Iran is already quite there yet, even though they have been completely degraded in their capabilities and also in their leadership, military leadership, but also civilian leadership. In a point in time, this is exactly the kind of dilemma that they will be in. I would assume that eventually they will. I think that Iran is weaker than they want us all to think. I think that they're investing a lot of resources and trying to make us all think, the West, through media, that they're actually holding strong and they can do whatever they want and close the Strait of Hormuz, where in fact they're being eroded in every day that passes with this operation. I'm not sure that they're willing to make those concessions today, but I would assume that over time they will.
There is a read that Israel would prefer the war to go longer, and that there's some concern here that the U.S. president might strike a deal, or at least a ceasefire, right, before Israel accomplishes all of its military goals. Is there any truth to that read?
I think what we're worried about as Israelis, by and large, and again, I'm not speaking on behalf of my government, I'm trying to look at this as a more broader national security interest. I think the question is not how long this war is, but what are the terms in which the war ends. I think the worry is that this war will end with an agreement that leaves the enriched uranium stockpile in Iran intact and sanctions are relieved. This will be a disaster.
I mean, without a ground operation, that's just a fact, right?
Well, either a ground operation or a negotiated agreement where President Trump insists and pushes Iran to concede to give it all away.
Can you see Iran making such a deal? Giving up all of that enriched uranium?
Well, you know, the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei had three options before all this started, right? He could concede to American demands, or he could concede to his own people and give them reforms, or confront. He chose to confront. And I think the outcome did not play, not for him personally well, and I think overall for Iran. Over time, they will face the same kind of constraints. If President Trump stands on the principles, which I think he will, and he will not give away the sanction relief without resolving those core issues, the nuclear issues, the missile issues that also worry the allies in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Emirates. If President Trump holds those principles, the war can continue. Maybe we'll have a ceasefire with the opening of the Strait of Hormuz that would buy time more broadly, but at least alleviate the energy. So I think this is something that the President Trump will want. But a real agreement without resolving the core issues, I don't see this possible.
There's an odd characteristic to President Trump describing it as a gift that Iran allowed a handful of tankers to go through the strait, a strait that was open before the war. Is there an irony to this war that Iran gained an ability to control that strait that it didn't have prior?
Well, Iran always had the ability to control the straits.
Exercising it now, though.
But they haven't exercised it. And the reason they haven't exercised it is because they were not in existential threat to the regime the way they are now. They're using means that they haven't used before because they're in a position where this is the only thing that they have left to be able to push the United States, Israel, and the countries around them. I think overall, the strategic decision to attack GCC, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, all of those, I think this will flip on them eventually. I think that if Iran enjoyed for many years some kind of I don't know if empathy, but at least participation of those countries in sanction evading mechanisms and, you know, money laundering.
A lot of money in Dubai.
I don't think this will continue the way it did. So overall, I think this will not be a strategic gain for them. Over time, the Strait of Hormuz problem will be resolved. You know, I'm not in a position to give advice to Admiral Bradley Cooper. He was the commander of the fleet. He knows exactly what needs to be done. I'm sure that there are operational solutions to them, and that we'll see them happening over time. This is not a very strong leverage. I'm way more worried about the stockpile of the enriched uranium that is buried in rubble. At least from an Israeli perspective, this is the pathway to a weapon that must be resolved.
Eyal Hulata, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I look forward to having you back on the program.
Thanks.